I simply refute, I disagree with the idea that if you turn the screw in this drug war, then you can change people's attitudes. The problem, ultimately, with this drug issue is that most people don't agree with Peter. We might not be prepared to get up and sign a petition to get rid of the drug laws, but people in this country are basically tolerant. They do, whether they know it or not, basically agree with John Stuart Mill's harm principle. And if we were to go down Peter's road and start prosecuting people and banging them for a year at a time, there would be a massive reaction to it, and quite rightly so. So from that point of view, perhaps Peter's changed my mind. Perhaps it would be a good thing if we could have a year or so of going after people, kicking in their doors in every street in Britain. Maybe that would bring us to our senses.
Peter Hitchens.
It's funny, I must have done in the past few years 20 debates with drug legalizers or decriminalizers, or general demoralizers of our society in their own interests of this kind. And not once has any of them listened to a word I've said. I listen very carefully to what they say. I'm very familiar with their arguments. It's because I'm so familiar with their arguments that I've written my book, which will be published in the autumn, and which deals with them. And fundamentally, the claim that it deals with, and the claim which I thought I dealt with in my opening remarks, was the fictional assertion that there is a war on drugs in this country, that there is something called prohibition taking place. There is no such thing. There is a law technically on the books which has not been enforced for more than 40 years. And what do I get at the end of quite a lot of this? I get told that this prohibition, which I've demonstrated, and no attempt has been made to challenge my figures, which I've demonstrated is not taking place, I'm told this prohibition is somehow causing the tragedies and personal disasters which fall upon people who take illegal drugs. But no, it cannot be. These drugs are not in any way illegal except technically. No effort is made by the authorities to enforce the laws against them. People take them because they want to, and more of them take them than would otherwise do so because the law is not enforced. And the tragedies which result cannot be laid at the door of a fictional prohibition, which is in itself a false and dishonest parallel with an event almost completely incomparable with our current situation. It is the result of the decriminalization of drugs which my opponent seeks. And to sit there and say, well, it's worth it so that I can have my pleasure, it's an act of selfish greed which passes all understanding. Anyone can sit there and say, well, I don't mind if some kid, some number of kids, even stipulated a number, ends up raving in a locked ward so I can have my free pleasure. What sort of moral attitude is that? The thing which is completely lacking from the position of the legalizers and the decriminalizers is any moral sense whatsoever, any concern for other people, any concern actually at all for anyone but themselves. And to equate this with liberty, this fuddling of the minds of the masses, so that they're actually much more easily manipulated and suppressed. To equate this with liberty of thought, speech and assembly is frankly insulting to the intelligence. How do you get up to it? I mean, where do you get this stuff from? Even John Stuart Mill would have been ashamed of it. Even the Economist would be ashamed of it.
Let me begin by putting some questions to Christopher. You conceded, and I tried to tease this out of you, there is an hypocrisy on the war on drugs. We are pretending to prosecute it to a greater degree than we actually are. And I think you agree with Peter's point that we pretend we're clamping down on cannabis, but actually if you're caught with a small amount of cannabis, you'll almost certainly just get a rap over the knuckles. How, now you say you're glad, because that means that the actual position is more liberalised than the de jure position. But do you think that is problematic, or should we be honest about it? I mean, the same sort of questions come up in criminal sentencing. We pretend we're sending somebody to prison for 10 years, knowing full well they'll get out in 5. Or we pretend they're sending them for a year, knowing they get out in 6 months. Do you think the hypocrisy about it is a problem, or are you only interested in the actual delivery of the war on drugs rather than its mismatch with the promises and pledges made for it?
I think in the great range of evils that prohibition has created,
Thank you. And finally, Matthew.
Hi, Matthew Feeney. I was hoping to ask the opinion of both the speakers on countries like Portugal, where they have now had over 10 years of decriminalization, and a lot of the fears of an increase in violence and increase of drug use have not materialized. I was wondering if I could get some comments on that.
Thank you. Christopher, let me start with you. The point about tobacco, I didn't ask you on Robert's initial point, but has tobacco regulation gone too far? If we legalise it, tax it, treat it like tobacco, Does that retain a strong black market? Do we need to be even more liberal on drugs, on presently illegal drugs, than we are on tobacco? And then any thoughts you've got on whether there are actually benefits to cannabis or other presently illegal drugs medicinally, in medical terms, or liberalisation experiments recently?
Yes, I think we've gone too far with tobacco, again, both from a principled standpoint and from a consequentialist standpoint. Prohibition isn't just a black and white issue. It's a sliding scale. The public health people today think that they can avoid the evils of prohibition by just moving incrementally towards it. And it's not true. If the black market is a problem, and it is, not least for selling to underage people, then the current rather hysterical war on tobacco is encouraging and has gone too far. I'm not saying don't have any tax on cigarettes at all, but clearly there is a relationship between tax and the black markets.